Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dr. Michael Rosenblatt, and I am the chair of the Prix Galien USA Awards Award Committee, and it's a great honor for me today to serve as the chair of a webinar to hear from the 2023 Prix Galien USA Award winners. To kick off this new year, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share some highlights as well as recognize the incredible achievements of the 2023 Prix Galien winners. Each year, the Galien Foundation convenes its global community to realize its mission to foster and recognize and reward excellence in scientific innovation to improve the state of human health. And it does this through recognition that's bestowed by an independent committee of 12 scientists. They are leaders in industry and academia, and they include 3 Nobel laureates. These coveted awards recognize truly outstanding private sector achievement in the invention and the development of new treatments for serious or deadly diseases. Galien Foundation is now sponsoring awards in biopharmaceuticals, vaccines, medtech, and digital app in the US, so across a whole spectrum of categories and in 14 countries, as well as Africa and India, through its Prix Galien International Awards program. The Galien Foundation just hosted the first Prix Galien India in New Delhi, with a rich history of scientific contributions to medicine and public health. India is a key player in the production of medicines, both in sheer volume and in value worldwide. And as you all know, it's the global leader in the production of generic drugs and vaccines, which ensure broader accessibility to therapies for those in less advantaged countries. The Galien Foundation also hosts public forums to advocate for best practices supportive of greater private sector biopharma innovation. The Galien USA Forum, which is held annually in New York, is just one example. There, among the topics, we hear from the world's leading healthcare organizations to discuss the past, present, and the future of human health. And finally, the Galien Foundation promotes partnerships between the private sector in biopharma and key public stakeholders like government, academia, NGOs, patient groups, and the media. In this regard, the Foundation's Pro Bono Humanum Award, which was launched in 2007 by the Galien co-founder and author and Nobel Peace Prize winner, Dr. Elie Wiesel, has made it a rising and influential force behind the global movement for health equity, advancing access to medicines as a human right, namely health for all. So now let's transition to the specific program we're going to have today. We had a very productive week last year in October 2023, with a series of 15 webinars over 3 days, and they covered each of the 177 product entries that came from 164 companies in 15 therapeutic areas. These were nominated by the awards committee for recognition as winners of a Prix Galien award, and there were 7 categories. They were Best Biotechnology Product, Best Pharmaceutical Product, Best Medical Technology, Best Digital Health Solution, Best Product for Rare Orphan Diseases, and Incubators, Accelerators, and Equity, Best Startup. So now we're going to hear from representatives of this year's company award recipients in three categories: Best Biotechnology Product, Best Pharmaceutical Product, and Best Product for Rare or Orphan Diseases. And I'm going to call on each person representing their company and their product. And we're going to ask them to address three questions which were posed to them in advance. And the questions were to tell us about the clinical benefit of the product to patients, as well as the social and economic gains for society. So that's question one. Question two will be, what did it take to get the winning product over the finish line to commercial success? And thirdly, what are they predicting for the future in 2024 and beyond for their specific field? So I think we're going to hear some very interesting insights, probably some interesting stories about issues that they encountered on the way to success. Now I'm going to, with that behind us, I'm going to turn to our first category, which is Best Biotechnology Product winner, and that product was Camzyos. And we're going to turn to Amy Sennert. Amy, please speak to us about your product, and tell us the answers to those three questions, please.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rosenblatt. It's such a privilege to be able to be here today and to share this story on behalf of the many individuals and teams that contributed to bringing this innovative medicine to patients. My name is Amy Sennert. I'm a physician. I'm a pediatric cardiologist, and I'm currently the vice president and a global program lead in our cardiovascular therapeutic area at Bristol Myers Squibb. I joined BMS in late 2020 via an acquisition from MyoKardia, and Camzyos was originally being developed at MyoKardia, and I was the clinical development lead for the programs. In terms of the first question, what is the clinical benefit to patients with symptomatic obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is also known as HCM? And this is a disease where the heart has thickened. It's causing an obstruction of outflow of blood from the heart. And it creates quite a bit of symptoms that create shortness of breath, fatigue, palpitations, passing out, and just a gradual inability to participate in activities of life the way one might want to. And so our studies were actually designed around addressing the main problem faced by the patients with how they feel and how they're functioning. And so what we see most of all in the treatment and hear from patients about how taking the treatment has impacted them is getting their life back, feeling better, able to do activities of daily living that were creating pain and fatigue and limitations for them that are now gone away. The other thing about the obstruction is that if it reaches a certain level, patients face in a shared decision-making process with their physician, whether or not to undergo an invasive surgery to remove part of the muscle and relieve the obstruction, or to have a catheter-based procedure for that same reason. We did conduct a second pivotal trial where the endpoint was looking at patients facing that surgery and their guideline eligibility for that surgery, and it was significantly reduced after treatment. And in that trial of roughly 115 patients, over 95% of them have continued to avoid the surgery procedures. So this is This is a big impact for patients to be able to have another therapeutic option that can be considered to hopefully prevent and keep them from the need of this invasive surgery, which, if you undergo it, takes time away from work, from family, and other things. So I think it's giving back an active life to adults in the prime of their lives. And we also use patient-reported outcomes and other measures, work productivity index, et cetera, to really give them back their lives and the opportunity to participate in a more normal way and feeling good. So in terms of what we face, HCM has been a well-known, well-described disease for decades. This was the first therapy ever developed specifically based on understanding the molecular mechanism of this disease, which is also genetic and inherited within families, and to take an approach with a cardiac myosin actin inhibitor to get, excuse the pun, to the heart of the matter within the heart muscle and allow it to function more normally. And so I would say the first thing that helped us get through this was world-class teams that were spending much time doing education, awareness, investing in, understanding the natural history of the disease in terms of how we could ultimately produce that benefit for patients. It took a lot of perseverance. We forget almost the pandemic at this point, but this study started in 2018. The last patient last visit, as we all held our breath, was March 14th of 2020. That allowed us to finish the pivotal study, which would have been catastrophic if we hadn't been able to do that. We did the filing and the analysis and the readout of the trial in our living rooms at home virtually. And I'm sure many experienced that, but that's what we were carrying through. And so I can't say enough about the cohesiveness of the team. As we hit challenges, we supported each other to find the solutions. And as we worked with the regulatory agencies, again, it was a lot of education, explaining to understand the endpoint, this feel and function endpoint, which is among the first in cardiovascular, which is more typically guided by a CV outcomes trial result. And then innovating around coming up with how the drug would be dosed, negotiating the label. It was approved and launched in the United States with REMS. This drug, like many cardiovascular drugs, is adjusted when you start it to your response. It's an optimal individualized response. And so these patients have gone from being seen once or twice a year in clinic, because there hasn't been a whole lot more one can do, to being seen every 3 months and checking how, if they're on the right dose and that they're tolerating that dose. And so we made it through all of that, and that really was a huge learning curve, I think, for all. And so if we turn to what's to come, we are now in an era of generating and real world data. So how is this playing out? In physicians who've used the drug are now starting to report their experience with it. We're very pleased that it reflects, in most cases, the results of the clinical trial. We'll be presenting data from the REMS at the American College of Cardiology meeting in about a month in Atlanta. And we have another phase 3 pivotal trial going on right now in non-obstructive HCM. It's another global trial. It will read out next year and could be an expansion of the label and indication for non-obstructed HCM. And I started by saying I'm a pediatric cardiologist. I couldn't be more thrilled to be able to say that on clinicaltrials.gov, our trial for adolescents aged 12 to 18 has kicked off. And so this, as I mentioned, is a genetic disease. It can affect children. And so we're excited to see how that will look. So the real world data, the NHCM, the pediatric study, and also we have studied mavacamten Camzyos in another indication area, which is heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, or HFpEF. And in addition, we have a second cardiac myosin inhibitor in development that we're also testing in HFpEF. So we see a potential future of entering a kind of rarer form of disease, very specifically attacking its underlying pathophysiology and learning and maybe being able to translate to a broader population.
Right. Amy, thanks so much. That's really a great story. I want to remind the listeners that you can send in questions. We're going to take Q&A at the end. You can direct them to certain panelists, or generally, I'll be looking at them when they come in. So please, if you have questions about the presentation or clarification, please send them in. I'm now going to move. We've got two winners in the category of Best Pharmaceutical Product. And we're going to begin with Mounjaro from Lilly. And I'm going to ask Ruth Gimeno to tell us about that product and respond to the three questions in front of the panelists. Ruth, please.
I want to start by thanking you, Dr. Rosenblatt, for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here on behalf of all of my colleagues and team members from Eli Lilly and Company. And I'd also like to thank the Galien Foundation for sponsoring this award. We know drug discovery and development is such a long and arduous path, and it means a lot to the scientists and the drug developers that there is an organization that recognizes their efforts and really celebrates them. So thank you for that. Also very much appreciate the chance to talk about Mounjaro, and maybe I'll start with your middle question, which is what challenges did we need to overcome in terms of developing Mounjaro? And let me take you back to 2011 when we actually started the Mounjaro project. At the time, we knew GLP-1 very well. We knew it had some potent pharmacology for diabetes. We knew a lot less about GIP, and there were a lot of voices that said GIP really is not going to have a lot of pharmacological activity. In fact, it could have some detrimental effects. And a lot of credit goes to our discovery scientists for really spending several years to build a scientific story and then ultimately convince us to launch into a drug discovery and drug development effort. It took persistence. Mounjaro is actually the second effort. We had an earlier effort on GIP/GLP that failed in phase 1. It was due to molecule properties. And scientists went back to the drawing board and made a better molecule. While we're in the middle of this, we also saw some data from our competitor Novo Nordisk on their GIP/GLP molecule. And that data was interesting, but certainly not earth-shattering. So again, the voices were there. Why were we bothering? Was this really worthwhile to make a dual agonist? So the persistence, the conviction in the target, I think, was one of the defining components of this project. Once we progressed the molecule in the clinic, it actually became very obvious where the benefit was. So the challenge then moved from should we do this project to how do we bring this as quickly to phase 3 as possible, and how do we develop it as well as possible? With any incretin, how we titrate it is an important component to minimize the GI side effect. And this is where we spent quite a bit of time. We actually had a separate titration study in phase 2. We came up with the phase 3 titration regimen really based on modeling. So we had never tested that exact sequence in the clinic. And it was very rewarding to see that it actually, we had picked the right titration regimen once we saw the phase 3 data. And then maybe the final challenge, and sort of a shout out to our commercial colleagues, was they needed to have the conviction to start investing in making this product early on before we saw the phase 3 data. This is the first synthetic peptide that is being produced with a fully synthetic process at scale. And that was actually not a small item. So big kudos to them for scaling up. I don't think we appreciated at the time how large the scale will be, and we're still playing catch up. But this was another important component. So thinking about pulling it all together, the themes were persistence and conviction. And the conviction was really driven by the desire, how could we do something that is better for patients than what we have today, which at the time were just single GLP-1 agonists. In terms of the clinical benefit that Mounjaro brings to patients, the key data were actually there already in phase 2 and then these data were confirmed in phase 3. We saw for the first time that more than 90% of individuals reached their treatment targets for diabetes, which is 7% A1C. But maybe more importantly, we actually now saw individuals that reached formal normoglycemia, 5.7% A1C. This is something we hadn't even talked about because we thought it was impossible to get normoglycemia in a patient with type 2 diabetes. So that was a big breakthrough to be able to offer that to roughly 2/3 of patients in the program. And then we saw weight loss up to 14% in the type 2 diabetes program. And we had always aimed for weight loss in the context of diabetes programs because we know it's the underlying pathophysiology. It's what drives the diabetes. So being able to see that 14% was something, again, we hadn't seen before, a real important benefit. But it also prompted us to initiate a phase 3 program for obesity, which is now approved. And in the US, it's a separate label. It's set-bound. In Europe, it's sold under Mounjaro. The other third component from a clinical benefit perspective is we knew from GLP-1 agonists that we're likely to have outcomes benefits. Cardiovascular outcomes benefits are well established with GLP-1 agonists. And if we look at a number of different biomarkers, colleagues at Novo Nordisk had outcome study ongoing for kidney, for some other indications. We felt there was a real opportunity to not just treat diabetes and obesity, but to improve the outcomes long-term for people living with diabetes and obesity. So we launched into a number of additional outcome studies, and some of them are starting to read out. Right now, we saw the Synergy NASH data showing a benefit in NASH. We will see sleep apnea data later this year. Our colleagues at Novo presented some very nice data with their GLP-1 agonist, semaglutide, on heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. We'll see our data later this year. In terms of where the field is going, I think you'll see a lot more studies with incretins, either single molecules like semaglutide or dual agonists in terms of different outcomes benefits. There's estimated to be roughly 200 comorbidities of obesity and diabetes. We are only starting to investigate some of them. We are already seeing in social media and real world evidence that there's likely benefit on additional indications. So big challenge in the years ahead is how are we establishing a benefit for all of these different indications. And we're probably going to face the question is, can we actually afford to do, or is it ethical to do placebo-controlled studies? And how will we actually demonstrate these outcomes benefits in the future? Some other trends that I think you're already starting to see is it's really reinvigorated the field of diabetes as well as the field of obesity. There is now a lot of different efforts looking for additional dual agonists. We have a triple agonist in phase 3 clinical development. Oral agents are coming fast and furious, and people are looking at various combinations as well as new ways to address the challenges of obesity and diabetes. From a societal perspective, roughly 10% of the world's population has diabetes. I think right now, a third or maybe 1 billion people live with overweight or obesity. And there's estimates out that this translates, once you take all the comorbidities into account, we are looking at the number one cause of death. We are looking at probably 12% or more of all healthcare expenditures. If we can have really effective therapies, if we can find ways to allow people to stay on these therapies and demonstrate the outcomes benefits to society, to payers, I think we're just going to really change the way people will live in the future. I'm hoping we'll see a much healthier lifespan. I think as we are thinking about diseases of aging, I think quite a few of them will be addressed with agents that affect diabetes and obesity. So it's just a really exciting time to be in this field. And I'm handing it over to my colleague from Novo Nordisk.
Okay, and I'll just say one thing before you hand it over, Ruth. Thank you. That's a spectacular story. So we have, just to be clear, we have two co-winners in this category of best pharmaceutical product. And the other one is Ozempic, and Stephen Goff from Novo Nordisk is going to speak to us about Ozempic. Steve, please introduce yourself and go on to address the three questions.
Thank you for the kind introduction. And thank you to the Foundation for the support and the award that we received last year. So to take the three questions that you posed to us, first of all, the clinical benefits of Ozempic in terms of patients as well as societal and economic or gains for society. As I mentioned, I think Ruth has touched on many of the things that I would also like to say. But just to start off, that we know that diabetes is a global problem with over 10% of the worldwide population suffering from diabetes. And 98% of those are type 2 diabetes. And this is presenting a massive strain on not just the individual and families, but also society. And we in Novo Nordisk feel as though we need to be part of the solution and not the problem. We need to develop medicines that enable patients to get them easily, able to administer them relatively easily, so that we see some benefits. And I think as we develop diabetes medicines these days, we move beyond benefits in terms of glycemic control. We have to look beyond weight. Many of the older medicines that we had for type 2 diabetes led to weight gain and certainly not weight loss. And then we also have to look, though, most importantly, to the outcomes. And Ruth touched on this. And I think one of the areas that, from an Ozempic point of view, where we've really invested heavily, is how we can deal with some of the outcomes and some of the complications that we see as a result of type 2 diabetes. And clearly, we've invested very heavily in programs looking at cardiovascular outcome trials, where we've seen significant reductions in cardiovascular disease. We've looked in other areas as well, as Ruth mentioned, in terms of heart failure. And as most recently as yesterday, in our Novo Nordisk press release, we were able to present the top line results on the first dedicated kidney outcomes GLP-1 receptor agonist trial, where we demonstrated a 24% reduction in the risk of kidney disease progression. And we all know that, or many people know that, chronic kidney disease, again, affects around 40% of people with type 2 diabetes. And the consequences of chronic kidney disease are kidney failure, resulting in dialysis for many, unfortunately, and also renal transplantation. So by moving to complications and moving beyond glycemia and beyond weight, we can have a significant impact on the individual. We can have a significant impact, not just on patients' lives, but the lives of their families and their family members, but also trying to address society. Ruth talked about obesity. If we look at the burden of obesity and we look at the burden of type 2 diabetes on society, this is enormous. Healthcare budgets, the amount of money that's being spent dealing with diabetes complications is enormous and is one of the biggest drains on certainly health services around the world. So we believe that medicines like Ozempic really have the potential not just to give a patient benefit, but a true benefit to society. So that was how I would answer the question around clinical benefit. In terms of what did it take to get our winning product, again, it's a similar story. We started investing in the incretin space, incretin biology and pharmacology over 30 years ago. And it's interesting when you read the newspapers today and people say, oh, it's almost by chance that we now see these benefits in weight and weight loss. This is something our scientists, and I know Lilly's scientists, were working on 30 years ago. This isn't by chance. This is something we were specifically looking for and addressing. So in terms of what did it take, it took a team effort. And again, when we first knew about incretins, we knew that GLP-1 had a very short half-life. We had to develop a long half-life, an extended half-life version, so we could not just give it once daily, but once weekly. We had to go through extensive clinical development programs, and our interactions with the regulators and the FDA were at times challenging. But I think in the end, we came through by being able to demonstrate that the clinical development programs were robust, that we could have meaningful impacts, not just on glycemia and weight, as I've mentioned, but also outcomes. And it's all about outcomes. And this is what the patient really cares about, is the quality of their life. And I think, as Ruth mentioned, that the healthy lifespan. And GLP-1 and certainly semaglutide almost seems to be the gift that continues to keep giving. In that when we look at different systems, and I say we've recently published data, or about to publish data, we presented our press release on chronic kidney disease, we can really impact on outcomes. So it's been a team effort over many years. These things don't just happen overnight, and it requires a lot of perseverance. It requires a lot of work from clever scientists, clinicians, and then getting things through regulatory authorities. And again, having good competitors, having people like Lilly and other companies, they spur us along so that we develop better products for our patients. You can't sit back on your laurels. In terms of prediction and trends for 2024 and beyond, again, I would agree that there's still lots to be done in the incretin space. This is a sort of known biology. We refer to it as a known biology, but there's so much we can explore in terms of GLP-1 itself, combination with other incretin hormones as either separate molecules or as coagonists, and also from a Novo Nordisk point of view, a combination with amylin, which we think will work in a very beneficial way in terms of glycemia and weight. Different routes of administration we already have, as you know, because we've previously won an award through the Galien Foundation, again for Rybelsus, an oral version of semaglutide, or if you like, an oral version of Ozempic, which is the same molecule, semaglutide. So I think different routes of administration, and this is going to be crucial when we try to tackle the burden of diabetes and obesity. So, but I think that what we're going to see this year is more outcomes, beneficial outcomes, because as I keep referring to, that's what it's all about. So really exciting times. Thank you for your support, your award, and I look forward to any questions that come my way.
That's great. Thank you, Steve. That's a great story and some really great insights. So we're going to move on now to the category of rare orphan diseases. And just to explain, we've got two speakers for one of the winners, which is Hemgenix. And then we've got a co-winner with a different drug, Spevigo. So I'm going to now turn to Hemgenix, which, as I said, is going to be presented by two people. And this is the category of best and rare orphan diseases. We have Paul Monahan and Matthew Kapusta. And I'll turn it to the two of you to introduce yourselves, name, title, and your company, and divide answering the questions the way you see fit. Please, Matt and Paul.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rosenblatt. It's really an honor and privilege to be with all these winners. And I will tell you, in terms of my career, this is certainly one of the top highlights to be recognized by the Prix Galien Foundation. I'll address the first question in terms of what it took to get Hemgenix over the finish line. For those that don't know much about Hemgenix, it is the world's first one-time administered gene therapy for patients living with hemophilia B. And we at uniQure have been for a quarter of a century been living the dream of trying to develop transformative therapies with potential for curative benefits for patients that are living with other rare and orphan diseases. And like all of us, we stand on the shoulders of giants, particularly in the field of genetic medicine, where the understanding of the genetic underpinnings of rare and orphan diseases was really developed in earnest in the 60s and 70s. And there was a tremendous amount of work understanding the clotting cascade back then and the relevance of enzymes like factor VIII and factor IX, which are missing for people with hemophilia A and hemophilia B. But also there was a tremendous amount of work that was happening in the 90s, in the early part of the new millennium, in AAV gene therapy. The first clinical studies were taking place about 30 years ago. And it really took a tremendous amount of iteration and a word that was used by Ruth, which is perseverance, in a completely new modality, in a new field. We at uniQure began our clinical testing of our gene therapy nearly 10 years ago. And there's a tremendous amount of work that was happening preclinically to understand the best way to administer these and the best way to design these constructs. In the end, we wound up conducting 3 independent clinical studies in the United States and Europe that involved nearly 70 patients with hemophilia B. We've generated a tremendous amount of data that includes long-term follow-up. And Paul will talk about some of the clinical benefits that we're delivering for patients with hemophilia B. But one of the things, when we started this journey, we developed a first-generation product that was only delivering around 3 to 5% of normal levels of factor IX activity for these patients. And while it was really delivering a profound impact, it was very clear that this was not optimal for patients and clinicians. So we spent quite a bit of work redeveloping a second generation with a hyperactive variant that we were delivering. And remarkably, we were able to demonstrate nearly a 10-fold increase in factor IX activity, which really was bringing these patients into a functionally curative normal range. So that was very, very exciting. And I think one of the major challenges working with the regulators in order to ensure that we don't have to repeat a lot of the work and can continue to move the program forward into late stage development. I think a second key challenge for us was in manufacturing. The manufacturing of these gene therapies are exquisitely complicated. And this is one of the advantages, and it's something that we've been working on for 15 years. And we're still learning. But the reality is a tremendous amount of work went into developing commercial scale, highly robust, high quality gene therapy medicines that were ready for prime time and for commercialization. And that was also, I think, a very big hurdle that we had to climb. And then lastly, we heard some of this that was discussed with others, trying to do all of this during a pandemic. We were trying to follow up nearly 70 patients, many of them following up on a weekly basis, hundreds of follow-up visits at a time that was very difficult. And the ability for us to begin a pivotal study and complete that pivotal study within 2 to 3 years, I think was quite frankly very remarkable. None of this would have happened without the blood, sweat, and tears from hundreds of people at uniQure and a tremendous amount of help from our partner CSL. But we had scientists and engineers, technicians, clinical operations people, regulatory people that really toiled for nearly a decade to get this over the finish line, and we're really delighted that we're seeing the benefits of patients today. And with that, I'll hand it over to Paul to talk about some of the other questions.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. My name is Paul Monahan. I'm a physician. I'm a pediatric hematologist and treated hemophilia for many years. And I'm the executive director for hematology research and development at CSL Behring. We're very grateful to the Galien Foundation for this award, and we're very grateful for the robust collaboration that we have with uniQure on this exciting product. Thinking about the benefits that Hemgenix brings, the current standard of care treatment for moderate to severe hemophilia B includes repeated prophylactic intravenous injections of factor IX protein, and to deter the development of chronic painful joint deterioration and disability, as well as the anxiety from the ever-present possibility of life-threatening bleeding events. These prophylactic infusions must be started early in life and continued lifelong. The effective each factor IX infusion lasts days to weeks at most. Adherence is burdensome. Breakthrough bleeding still occurs. And hemophilia can limit an individual's options for education, employment, and recreation. The clinical benefit of a one-time dose of Hemgenix gene therapy is clear. Our latest data from the pivotal HOPE-B trial was presented at the American Society of Hematology in December, showing that after 3 years, 94% of patients remain free of continuous prophylaxis therapy with bleeding controlled. In terms of economic benefit, when we consider the total lifetime cost for an adult with moderate to severe hemophilia B in the United States can be upwards of $20 million. Our data suggests that even a single dose of Hemgenix can generate significant cost savings to the healthcare system. And the payer community has responded positively to this value proposition. But beyond these trial data and numbers and dollars, our clinical trial participants report that Hemgenix has allowed them to feel more positive and confident in their ability to control hemophilia and to perform in school, at work, and has improved how they feel about their future. So moreover, the success of this application of liver-directed AAV vector technology has bigger implications for society by demonstrating sustained correction of an inherited single gene defect using this platform of AAV. Most diseases caused by a single gene defects are rare, like hemophilia B, which occurs in 1 in 20,000 males. Most diseases caused by, but it's estimated, nevertheless, that over 400 million people worldwide are diagnosed with one of 7,000 single gene disorders. So for other conditions beyond hemophilia B, that could be addressable by gene expression in the liver. Hemgenix offers a therapeutic paradigm that does engender hope for the future of individuals with rare diseases as a whole. As we look to 2024, in the context of this pioneering Hemgenix approval, we see so much possibility for innovation. CSL is committed to meeting the treatment needs of people living with hemophilia B and other rare bleeding disorders. Our Idelvion factor IX replacement has been the preferred treatment for prophylaxis since FDA approval in 2016. Now the availability of Hemgenix as a gene therapy choice for adults allows us to offer a comprehensive portfolio of innovative medicines for hemophilia B. We're very interested to work with the community of hemophilia B patients and their healthcare providers to optimize choice in treatments, to provide better and more durable disease control, to minimize the extent to which hemophilia impacts an individual's hopes and goals. This effort includes extending the study of CSL-bearing gene and protein therapies in Asia in 2024. Moreover, our opportunities for pioneering and innovation in 2024 may have an impact that beyonds hemophilia B once again. As one of the first systemically delivered AAV gene therapies, Hemgenix will break new ground with regards to regulatory and operational management in global settings. And in particular, we'll be implementing novel mechanisms to document real-world sustained impacts of a drug that acts for years after a single injection. In the commercial setting, pioneering funding solutions are already being developed and realized that will impact the ability for gene therapy to succeed in the market and not in the research setting alone. Hemgenix is among the only AAV therapies to establish safety in adults, and so extending our safety and efficacy to pediatric populations is major ground that we will break in 2024. Hemgenix provides the opportunity to expand the field of AAV gene therapy in a global fashion in terms of access to markets, across geographies, and we believe across the lifespan of individuals born with rare diseases like hemophilia B. So CSL has been at the forefront of providing treatments for hemophilia community for many years. Look forward to continuing that legacy for many years to come, as well as our robust collaboration with uniQure. Once again, we'd just like to express our gratitude to the Galien Foundation for the support of pharmaceutical discovery.
Thank you, Paul and Matt, for telling us the Hemgenix story. I'd like to remind the audience that we will be taking Q&A, and please, if you have questions, please post them in the Q&A through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We're now going to turn to our final presentation, and it's about the products Spevigo, and Natalie Nunez Gomez is going to be speaking to us from early in the morning in San Diego. It's Natalie.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. And thank you, Michael, for the introduction. And I have to say, it's really an honor and privilege to speak to this prestigious setting. So thank you for inviting me. I'm the Vice President for Clinical Development and Medical Affairs for Immunology at Boehringer Ingelheim, which includes our compound Spevigo. And I'm delighted to represent our very passionate team collaborating on bringing innovations to patients with autoimmune diseases and often rare diseases as well. So you asked me what it took us to get our winning product Spevigo over the finish line. And just to give you some context and background here, it took almost a century after the first description of the rare and potentially life-threatening skin disease, generalized pustular psoriasis, which we usually abbreviate with GPP, to provide people living with the disease with an approved and effective treatment option, which was now the approval of Spevigo. And Spevigo is the first therapy of its kind. It's a breakthrough innovation bringing hope for these patients suffering from GPP. And it's the first and only IL-36 receptor antagonist approved by the FDA, specifically designed for this disease and the target of the IL-36 pathway, which is the underlying mechanism and driver of GPP, and also potentially other serious rare or ultra-rare inflammatory conditions. So what did it take us to get there? I have to say, like my previous speakers, there was a lot of pioneers' work involved, which also led to a better understanding of the disease and especially the underlying biology. And the execution of our clinical development program, as the disease was not fully understood, was really highly dependent on a close collaboration with clinical experts, also with patients, patient communities at a global level. So we really spoke to a broad circle of people. And we also found out that each GPP patient journey is really unique. And so it's really challenging to bring this into a clinical program. So, and these partnerships in the end resulted in developing and validating specific and clinically relevant endpoints, and endpoints which are also focused on the patient experience. And then we designed the first global randomized clinical trial focusing on important treatment goals, including the most crucial aspects of this flare treatment and of the disease overall. And in the end, we obtained breakthrough data, and this ultimately led to the FDA's expedited approval because there was really a high unmet need. And it resulted in an accelerated availability of this novel intervention for the potentially life-threatening GPP flare situation, which is one of the few emergency situations in dermatology. So in short, or summarizing this, understanding the underlying pathway, the patient needs, also the external landscape, and then having a dedicated team working towards this common goal of bringing this therapy to the market and to the patients, all contributed to the success of Spevigo. So to your next question, what the clinical benefit of the product to patients is, as well as the social and economic gains for society. So in the end, the approval of Spevigo represents Boehringer Ingelheim's effort to bring innovative treatments to the people who need them. And GPP can have an enormous impact on the patient's physical and mental well-being. There's a lot of anxiety of the next flare, a lot of burden of disease also in between flares. And Spevigo provides people living with GPP with an option to treat the flares as well as the chronic symptoms. And focusing on rare diseases helps elevating awareness. So in my view, rare diseases are often overlooked, but that doesn't mean that they are irrelevant. These conditions in the end collectively affect millions of people globally, and the impact can be really profound, not just on the patients, but also on their families, on the healthcare systems, on the society overall. And yet they remain often misunderstood, also under-researched, and therefore often are also misdiagnosed, which can lead patients having the wrong treatment and potentially making the disease even worse. And we know from a lot of patients that it took a while for them to get diagnosed. And we kept this in mind when we developed our clinical trials. The FSIL clinical trial program for GPP was designed to really reflect the disease course. So we had one program focusing on flare treatment, thereby providing this emergency intervention for patients in a flare crisis, which can be potentially life-threatening when left untreated. And we had another study in parallel, the FSR2 study, which assessed the long-term treatment of GPP. So the ability to prevent flares overall, but also the impact on residual symptoms. And then we have a long-term study, an open label extension study, which evaluates the long-term use of Spevigo beyond 1 year to be able to generate more data for this chronic disease. So in the end, this was a very large clinical program, the largest of its kind in this indication. And yeah, ultimately, we were recognized by getting the first approval by the FDA. So to your last question about predictions, trends for 2024 and what is about to come in our specific field. So in my view, there's a lot of potential in the rare dermatological disease space. There are already a lot of treatments, especially in immunology, for frequent indications. But for rare diseases, many of these diseases do not have any treatments at all or very limited treatment options. And I think it's really necessary to focus on these diseases as well. And with this high unmet medical needs such as GPP. And I can say that we from Boehringer Ingelheim are really committed to focus on this field and to develop novel treatments that address the patient needs and that could also have a positive impact on the life of these people living with rare diseases and also their families. And we have a very large pipeline here underscoring this commitment overall. And looking specifically at spesolimab, we do not want to stop with GPP. We see this as a beginning and are also exploring the full potential for other serious dermatological diseases, such as hidradenitis suppurativa, where you have some treatment options, but with very limited effect. So we would like to help to improve the treatment in this disease. Netherton syndrome, which is an ultra-rare disease also affecting children, and pyoderma gangrenosum, another rare disease with limited treatment options. And studies are ongoing. It's our hope to achieve further breakthroughs for patients with no or limited approved treatment options in those diseases. And so we are very passionate, very inspired by the future and the clinical benefits we can hopefully bring to these patients. So thank you also for giving us the award. It really feels like you're recognizing our work, and we are very proud of having it.
Thanks. Well, thank you, Natalie. And these have just been wonderful presentations. I might just take a couple of minutes to extract what I think are some common themes across all of these presentations. So we've heard, first of all, about a broad array of therapeutic modalities across a really broad array of diseases, from the very common to the very rare. And each of these stories, I think, illustrates a tremendous amount of innovation, but it's innovation that's focused on patients and on real outcomes that are meaningful to patients. And I think we can all be very proud of that. We've also basically seen what the output of world-class teams are in each case, from small companies to large companies, these are world-class teams that are completely driven to solve the problem, harnessing science and medicine to do so. And in in all these cases, hearing about doing that in the context of a pandemic. I think, as it was pointed out by a number of the speakers, we forget what that was like to work under those conditions and yet to come out with such spectacular success stories. That in itself deserves special recognition. We heard the words persistence, perseverance. I think that's clear, not to be daunted by obstacles that we encounter, sometimes reversals, and I would say very often in the face of skeptics who say that this will never work. And you know what they do once it succeeds? They say, it was obvious. So I commend all of you for persevering through that period of getting something to across the finish line. We heard about production and manufacturing risks. And, I think it's important to point out that these companies actually go there at great risk, unlike a experiment in your laboratory, which might or might not work, to get ready both for clinical trials and then, assuming you make the assumption you'll get approval, there is a lot of capital that is put at risk, totally at risk, until you really start producing these wonderful products. And then Steve said something that I hadn't heard before or thought before, and I think it really is a force where we in the field, which is having good competitors. Steve said if you have good competitors, they spur you on. And of course, these competitions are, yes, they're between companies, but they are often, and hopefully in most cases, competition for the benefit of patients. So in these competitions, as illustrated here, you don't have a winner and then the rest are losers. You have a couple of winners, but the real winner is the patient. And so I want to thank all of you for these were wonderful, thoughtful presentations. And I want to thank the audience members. It makes us look to 2024 in terms of anticipating novel and outstanding contributions that are going to be reviewed by our awards committee. The webcast that we had today was recorded, and it's going to be available on demand through the Galien Foundation YouTube page. But most of all, big congratulations to the 2023 winners, and thanks to the Galien Foundation for hosting us. Again, thanks for your participation. Great to be with all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again.